welcome back to another episode of Green Jeans. I'm your one co-host, Annika Van Rossum, joined by my other co-host,
Maya Van Rossum.
And if you couldn't tell by our last names, we are related. We are, in fact, a mother-daughter duo, activist duo, and this podcast is all talking about important social and environmental justice issues through a generational lens, because many of the issues that my generation is fighting right now were things that my mom's generation was raising alarm bells about decades ago. So yeah, I don't know, Mom, anything to report, or should we just get into the topic?
Let's just get into the topic. And I just thought, the lead in for the show that we're going to do, as we talked about, is I know for me personally, there are so many interesting articles out there and topics out there. And I basically have a pile of things printed. I do still print things. I like to read paper. I like to read real books. And I walk around with them intending to read them, but I never find the time. But this week I actually found some time and I caught up on some reading, and I got really, I was able to dig in on some important legal cases that helped me come up with some legal ideas and strategies for both the Delaware Riverkeeper Network work and the Green Amendments work. And I also read some really interesting topics about some issues that I didn't know about. And so today's show is about sharing one of those.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, I'm excited to hear about it.
So we're going to talk about Nurdles.
That's okay.
Yep.
Is it a candy?
No, it's not. Although, it seems like for fish and critters, they might be eating it like it's candy, but of course it has devastating consequences when they do. So what I thought we would do, Annika, is I found a really interesting article, and it's really comprehensive and it really lays it all out. And so I thought we could just go through the article, share it with the audience so the audience can learn as much about Nurdles from this article as I did and as you will. And we can pull in other strands of thought and information as we go. Does that make sense?
Sure, let's do it.
Annika, this article was printed in Vox.com. And so I thought we'd go through it. And not only are we going to learn about Nurdles and its relationship to fracking and fossil fuels, but we're also going to, through this story, point out another big problem with environmental protection laws here in the United States, and actually why green amendments are so important.
All right, sounds good. I'm excited.
Okay, so here we go. So the title of the article is "The Massive Unregulated Source of Plastic Pollution You've Probably Never Heard of."
Spooky. It's
written by Neil Danesha, and it was printed May 6th of 2022. And there's a quote: "We're making these Nurdles and basically spilling oil, just in a different form." New Orleans. On an overcast day in April, on the edge of Chalmette Battlefield, a few miles outside of the city, Liz Marchio examined a pile of broken twigs and tree branches on the bank of the Mississippi River. "Usually I try to look. Oh, there's one," said Marchio, a research associate for the Vertebrate Museum of Southeastern Louisiana University. She bent down to pick up something with a pinch of her thumb and forefinger and placed it in her palm for me to see. The object of Marchio's hand was small, round, and yellowish white, about the size of a lentil.
I feel like lentils are pretty big. Not massive, but that's it's not tiny. You can see it.
Yes, you can see it. So it's not tiny. It's very seeable, but it's I don't know, if you had a beach covered with lentils, it's bigger than a grain of sand, but all right. So it looked like an egg, as if a fish or salamander or tadpole could come wriggling out of it. Marchio handed it to me and turned to flip over a tree branch floating in the water, where dozens more lay waiting underneath. She made a sound of disgust. We had come hunting, and we had quickly found our quarry, Nurdles.
Interesting, spooky. I don't know. This is definitely a well-written article.
It is a well-written article, but I'm not sure that the name Nurdle is a very well-picked name.
No.
So a nurdle, in case you were wondering, Annika, a nurdle is a bead of pure plastic. It is the basic building block of almost all plastic products, like some sort of synthetic ore. Their creators call them pre-production plastic pellets or resins. Every year, trillions of nurdles are produced from natural gas or oil, shipped to factories around the world, and then melted and poured into molds that churn out water bottles and sewage pipes and steering wheels and the millions of other plastic products we use every day. You are almost certainly reading this story on a device that is part nurdle.
Wait, so nurdles are like the pre-part to, like, they're melted down to turn into plastic materials?
So what I think they do is they take it, right? We always talk about how plastic's made from fossil fuels,
Yeah.
right? And so I think what they're saying is, they take their fossil fuels and their ingredients, and then they make the plastic, but make it into these tiny pellets that then get shipped around to different places. And so, like, if you were a company making plastic water bottles, you would get a bag of nurdles or a shipment of nurdles. You would melt that plastic, those little nurdles, melt them down, and then put them in like your water bottle mold.
Okay.
To make water bottles. So the nurdles are the plastic.
Okay.
That is, but that gets transformed, gets melted and then again reformed into all the different plastic products we use.
Okay, gotcha.
That is the ideal journey for a nurdle, but not all of them make their way safely to the end of a production line. As Marcio and I continued to make our way upriver toward New Orleans French Quarter, she began collecting nurdles in Ziploc bags, marking in red Sharpie the date, location, number of beads collected, and the time taken to collect them. So it sounds like this is like a good volunteer monitoring program, kind of like how at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we have volunteers go out and collect water quality samples, or if there's been an oil spill, we have people go out and help monitor what happened with the oil spill.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that they've got that going on for Nurdles.
The name, I just can't.
I know it's a dumb name, but it's a dumb product too. At one point, on the side of a levee outside the lower 9th Ward, she collected 113 nurdles in 5 minutes.
Oh my God.
This is not, I don't know, that sort of sounded like a small number to me, but maybe not.
In 5 minutes though?
Yeah, maybe not. It's a lot, but I don't know. It's, yes,
in 5 minutes though. That's a lot of things in 5 minutes. I don't know.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Like throughout a day, maybe not a lot, but 113 in 5 minutes. When was the last time you collected 113 things in 5 minutes?
Well, this number is even more dramatic, and I think makes the point even better to somebody like me, I guess isn't good at imagining things. This is not uncommon. An estimated 200,000 metric tons of nurdles make their way into oceans annually.
Oh.
The beads are extremely light, around 20 milligrams each. That means under current conditions, approximately 10 trillion nurdles are projected to infiltrate marine ecosystems around the world each year.
Oh, that's alarming. Okay.
All right. Now we get into, so we have this horrible, right, idea of these little plastic nurdles everywhere. Now, what does it really mean? I mean, besides the fact that there were all these fossil fuels drilled and monkeyed around with, right, contributing to the climate crisis and water pollution and other forms. We had that. Now we have the nurdles. Now they're in the environment. Okay, so now what happens? Hundreds of fish species, including some eaten by humans, and at least 80 kinds of seabirds eat plastics. Researchers are concerned that animals that eat nurdles risk blocking their digestive tracts and starving to death.
Oh God.
Just, yeah, isn't it horrible? So just as concerning is what happens to the beads in the long term. Like most plastics, they do not biodegrade, but they do deteriorate over time, forming the second largest source of ocean microplastics after tire dust.
Okay.
Didn't we-
Fun.
There's much we still don't know about how plastics can harm the bodies of humans and animals alike. But recent research has shown that microplastics can be found in the blood of as much as 80% of all adult humans, where they can potentially harm our cells. We may not eat the plastic beads ourselves, but Nurdles seem to have a way of finding their way back to us.
Oh. I'm like, it's one of those things that I hate to say, like, I'm not surprised to hear anymore because, like, that seems to be making its way into the news, but it's still, like, very alarming. You know, it's weird.
Well, that's what I think so gross about so much when it comes to the environment. It's like it is alarming and it's shocking, but it's not really surprising because
Yeah.
every time we turn around, there's another environmental harm that we've foisted on the environment that just comes back and bites us in these horrifying ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's why, like, it's really important to have nonprofits like Delaware Riverkeeper Network, who are actually working on a lot of like PFAS and PFOA and plastics issues and monitoring those. And I mean, I think people really underestimate like what smaller nonprofits, their local nonprofits, are actually doing to monitor and also like keep the public updated. And a lot of that science that these news articles pull from does come from these nonprofit scientists or like experts that nonprofits hire so they can do proper advocacy, which is a great time to also say if you're listening to this podcast and you live in the Delaware River watershed, which is New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Delaware, highly recommend that you give a donation, become a member for free at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, because that is one of the key issues we work on. Not microplastics in the ocean, but like plastics in the Delaware River and PFAS and PFOA, which are also in like most humans' bloodstream at this point.
And fracking, right? The source of it all. Like frack natural gas. And you know what's happening more and more is that the fracking industry, they're sort of changing their messaging and their marketing away from, well, we need it for fuel and electricity, to, well, we need it for plastics. Now we know what that means. And so, you know, at Delaware Riverkeeper Network, so much of what we do is joining in that national battle by other advocacy organizations to say, when it comes to fossil fuels, we need to keep it in the ground. We need to keep it in the ground because of the climate crisis and for a whole boatload of reasons. And Nurdles is one of those reasons. So our advocacy to stop fracking is advocacy to stop Nurdles. So yeah, I agree. Contribute to the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We sure could use your support. And, you know, we provide lots of ways for people to engage, like the kind of volunteer monitoring, maybe not for Nurdles, but when there have been oil spills and other threats to the Delaware River, we really, you know, get out there with our volunteers to make a difference. So, well, speaking of spills, Nurdle spills. Now we're coming to Nurdle spills. In most of the United States, the federal and local government respond to Nurdle spills, big and small, in the same way. Ready for this?
Oh God, I'm gonna hate it.
By doing practically nothing.
Knew it.
Nurdles. So, and this comes back to the law. Nurdles are not classified as pollutants or hazardous materials. So the Coast Guard, which usually handles cleanups of oil and other toxic substances that enter waterways, bears no responsibility for them.
Okay. I wish people who listen could like see my face, because I feel like most of these things, again, like I don't really have words for it because I'm not shocked, but I'm kind of like, the heck. So I just make a lot of facial expressions because I just am like, again, I'm not surprised, but I'm always kind of like, why do people suck?
Well, so we don't have action at the federal government, right? And that's what we just learned. And now the article goes on to say, likewise, most state governments have no rules in place around monitoring, preventing, or cleaning up nurdle spills. A spill is often an occasion of great confusion as local and state environmental agencies try to figure out who might be responsible for managing it. In the eyes of the federal government and every state except California, which began regulating marine plastics in 2007, nurdles are essentially invisible. For all official purposes, a nurdle that has escaped into the wild may as well have entered a black hole. So, I mean, to me, this is very clear. This is another one of those reasons why we need constitutional green amendments, right? Amendments, add environmental rights amendments in the Bill of Rights section of all state constitutions, and then ultimately at the federal level, but starting at the states. Because when there are no laws and we have an environmental harm taking place that government is either a party to or doing nothing in response to, people need some legal authority to turn to force their government to act to protect them. It seems to me that nurdles is a perfect example of a gap in the law that can and should be filled by having a constitutional right. I don't know what you think about that, but it seems to me that this is another good example. And speaking about donations, that's why people should donate to green amendments for the generations, because that's exactly what we're fighting for.
No, I think you're right. And I think for me, like why I also rail so hard on green amendments and why I rail so hard on green amendments and why I think people should support it and like why you should donate to them as well. I'm trying to figure out how to, like, and I'm not saying this that like if you didn't take environmental law or anything like that you wouldn't understand it, because it's actually very easy for anybody to understand that government agencies currently, in my opinion, love to be like, there's no practice, procedure, statute that lets us do this, or they look for the tiniest word in the statute or regulation that says, this is why we don't have to do this. And that's why when you go to law school, you read so many cases of basically agencies finding ways to skirt around doing extra duties because they don't want to do it. And the court having to be like, nah, if we read all these things, you actually do have to do it. And green amendments, I think, provides that way that like they can't wriggle out of it. It's like, no, this is the Bill of Rights. And whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, a nothing, a whatever, a non-political, whatever, like I think everybody understands and knows and has respect for the Bill of Rights. And so I think it's a very hard case for any government agency. I mean, legally you can't, but to even try to say like, well, we don't really feel like upholding the Bill of Rights for this state, and you just simply can't do it. Yeah.
No, it really does change the landscape. And one of the best examples are in those areas where there is an absence of law. And if there's an absence of law, then the government does not have a legal obligation. And if they don't have a legal obligation, there's nothing we, the people, can do about it, because that's the way the law works. But if you have a constitutional right, then you can change that. So just like you said. So shall we go on?
Yes.
So here in Louisiana, we're making these nurdles and basically spilling oil, just in a different form. I think that is such a striking, stark visual.
Yeah.
Right? Like just all these little nurdle plastic pellets pouring out as though they were like thick, dark, black oil just running into the environment. I think that's a really incredibly scary visual.
Agreed.
So that was said by Mark Benfield, an oceanographer at Louisiana. Louisiana State University, who studies microplastics. And no one notices it, and no one seems to do anything about it. A nurdle often escapes from the plastic production process in mundane ways, slipping into drains at factories, or spilling out of cargo containers while being transported by trains and ships. When nurdles are being loaded into trains, for example, they are often blown into rail cars using large hoses. The beads can leak around the edges of hoses at factories and out the sides of rail cars as they travel to distribution centers. Benfield and Marchio have both found nurdles lining the sides of tracks used by Nurdle carrying trains. It just seems like it's just like all along the chain, right? There's just this incredible irresponsibility when it comes to these Nurdles. Like I was going to say, and nobody's doing anything about it. And that's exactly the point of the article. Nobody's doing anything about it.
Yeah.
Except these volunteers, it sounds like, and these scientists that are really picking up the mantle and trying to make a difference.
Yeah. No, I just I don't know. This will always be the thing that bugs me. And like to anybody that is listening to this podcast or knows people that like have money or do money or like want to support good causes, it really is like find your nonprofits and encourage those people to donate or support or whatever, because like whether it's citizen volunteers who heard about it through a nonprofit or scientists who are hired by a nonprofit, like these are the people working to make change, not like all the stuff that's going on right now with like, don't buy Kanye West gear, like he's an anti-Semite, and like don't give him your money, like give your money to people actually trying to save the planet, who are like literally taking time out of their day to go pick up little tiny plastic beads, which is really important for like when I'm going to say when the day comes that's like these companies are ruining our environment and here's all the evidence that we found.
The thing is that what's also so scary is you can just think, unless you're somebody who's mindful of this. And that's why I found this article so interesting, because this isn't really something that I had dug into and been thinking about. But if you're not aware, and that's why we wanted to read the article, if you're not aware, then you could be walking in places and spaces where these Nurdles are, and you would never even know. You would just see, you probably wouldn't notice them, but if you did, it's just like a little lentil on the ground. No harm, no foul, but in fact, it's big harm, big foul. And that's why learning about things like this is so important, because knowledge is power. Very literally, it's power to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, however, a large spill, often during transportation, will send millions or even billions of Nurdles out into the world all at once, coating shorelines with deposits so thick they could be mistaken for banks of snow. And that's actually what happened in Sri Lanka. In May of 2021, a container ship off the coast of Sri Lanka caught fire and sank, releasing an estimated 1,680 metric tons of Nurdles in an incident the United Nations calls the single largest plastic spill on record. About a year earlier, in August 2020, a storm hit a ship docked at the port of New Orleans, knocking a container filled with bags of Nurdles into the Mississippi River. Hundreds of millions of beads escaped from their bags, coating local beaches in white plastic and floating down toward the Gulf of Mexico. They would remain long after the spill. Marcio pointed to a small dimple on the side of the first Nurdle we found that identified it as a likely remnant of that spill. And the article says that big spills like this happen probably once a year.
That's too much. Once a year is too much for that.
Yeah. So
I mean, ever is too much for that, but definitely once a year is way too much for that.
Yeah. I mean, you could just imagine if you had a massive oil spill once a year, what would be the outrage of people? But an oil spill is much more visual.
Yeah.
And so people get alarmed and outraged. Nurdles, people haven't heard about Nurdles.
Yeah.
So apparently the University of Texas has there's a gentleman there, Jace Tunnel, who founded the Nurdle Patrol Citizen Science Project, which asks contributors to count Nurdles on their local beaches and uses the data to create a map of that pollution. Another powerful way that volunteers can really help make a difference. And what's
that's just like, again, just like not to like over harp on it, but again, I do think it's like things that people don't process, that like if this ever became something that would go to like a Senate hearing, or like when evidence has to be moved to make EPA or some agency up their regulations or change their standards, like this is what people are going to use to say like here's the evidence, and it always ends up being like years in the making of like here's what we've done the last 5 years. And I just don't think people process like how important like citizen science or community science is.
Yeah, it says that this map shows, it says, the vast majority of red and purple dots, which correspond to particularly high levels of nurdles, appear in the petrochemical hubs of Texas and Louisiana. So once again, Texas and Louisiana being slammed by the petrochemical industry. Like, how horrifying. How much do these people have to suffer for crime and mistakes?
I would say, for people who don't know, I think we did do an episode on it, but also Louisiana is home to a place called Cancer Alley, which is where like a specific community of people of color are targeted with, like, I think like it's over 100 or over 200 industrial chemical petrochemical plants, and there's just like, it's called Cancer Alley because there's a ridiculous surge of people getting cancer there. So
Yeah. I mean, it's really horrifying. Now here it goes on. I'm going to skip a little piece because I want to get to the part about what it does in the environment. In addition, to the people problems that we've talked about with the microplastics and getting into people's bodies. It says here that a nurdle in the wild is a sneaky thing. Even before it starts breaking down, it is difficult to spot from afar, unlike the plastic bags or bottles we often associate with plastic pollution. It does not give off a heat signature or emit fumes or create a sheen on the surface of water the way an oil spill might. What it does do is attract toxic pollutants. A nurdle floating down, say, the Mississippi River will absorb the pollutants riding alongside it while sloughing off the water. It also provides a convenient home for phytoplankton, which will go on to attract zooplankton, which eat the phytoplankton and emit dimethyl sulfide, better known as the smell of sea. For many marine animals, the smell of sea is the smell of food. So seabirds like albatrosses and petrels track dimethyl sulfide to locate patches of plankton from afar, swooping down to pluck their plankton-eating prey out of the water. A nurdle is the size and shape of a fish egg. Its camouflage is nearly perfect after some time in the water, looking and smelling like easy pickings to fish, birds, turtles, and crustaceans alike.
Spooky again.
Now, here's the horrifying part, Annika.
Okay.
I mean, this has all been horrifying, but once eaten, nurdles can tangle a creature's intestines or make it feel as if it is full, said Benfield. A 1992 EPA report found that at least 80 species of seabird. Oh my gosh, this has been going on so long. How did I not have this? Maybe because it's Texas and Louisiana versus the Delaware River, but like, yeah. I feel I've done something horrifyingly wrong because I'm not already so fully aware of this. But it says a 1992 EPA report found that at least 80 species of seabirds ate nurdles, Benfield said. That number has since more than doubled. Plastics provide no nutrients to animals, but an animal that fills up on the beads will eat less food as a result, meaning it could starve to death without even knowing that it was starving.
Which is like not a new thing in the sense of like, it's the same, I think, all the images we've seen of whales and dolphins with plastic, their stomachs cut open full of plastic bags, is they eat it because they think it's jellyfish or something, and then they never eat again because they feel full all the time and because their body can't even like dispel the bags.
And then if you go to this article, and if we can link it in the show notes, they have a picture of a dead fish and they're holding open its mouth, and just like the whole inside of its mouth is filled with these little nurdles, like all around it. So that's clearly what killed it.
Yeah. That's great.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
Plastics are endocrine disruptors. We've talked about that, meaning they can stunt an animal's development, and researchers are studying whether toxic pollutants can pass from a nurdle into an animal's tissue and subsequently up the food chain. But measuring the full impact is difficult, in part because it's difficult to know exactly what causes a marine animal to die in the world that is increasingly hostile to marine animals. But of course, if it's going up the food chain, right, eventually it's going to get to the people.
Yeah.
So
alarming.
So they talk a little bit about things that can be done and how difficult it is to clean up Nurdles. And just go on and talk about more horrifying ways that Nurdles hurt the environment, hurt critters, hurt animals. So the article, it sort of goes back over the territory of the impacts and then just re-emphasizes that while the Coast Guard usually takes responsibility for cleanups of oil and toxic substances that spill into waterways, it has no responsibility for non-toxic spills because Nurdles aren't deemed hazardous to human health under federal or Louisiana state law. A court had to decide which agency this was when responding to a spill, if any, was responsible for cleaning up the spill, said Gregory Langley, a spokesperson for the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. The problem with court action is it's not instantaneous, Langley said. The Mississippi River, of course, was not beholden to the courts. While the agencies waited and debated whose job it was to clean up the Nurdles, the current carried them downriver. If you lose something in the river, said Langley, it's gone. They talk about how the company paid a little bit of money to support a little bit of cleanup. There was some voluntary cleanup. But essentially, this was a major spill that happened here in the US, and the law didn't allow us to do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, really, Annika, we don't have to read the whole article. I think it's really worthwhile. People who are listening, who are interested in this, there's more to this article. They talk more about spills. They talk more about the lack of accountability, and they talk more about really re-emphasizing the fact that there is no law at the state level or the federal level that fully, fairly, or effectively addresses this, particularly when there's a Nurdle spill, which brings us back to Green Amendments for the Generations and having that constitutional right. We're fighting to get these Green Amendments, getting communities supported so they can seek and secure Green Amendments in every single state across the nation. Certainly Louisiana and Texas need Green Amendments. By the way, did I tell you there seems to be some interest in Green Amendments growing on in Texas? So anybody out there who's interested in Green Amendments, go to forthegenerations.org, learn how you can be involved in your state, make a donation, volunteer your time, get educated, join a training. It's worthwhile. And because if you're concerned about Nurdles, this may be a pathway to help.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. No, I agree. And again, I think it's just a good way to stop agencies from trying to wriggle their way out of their responsibilities, which I feel like they're constantly doing.
Yeah. Well, Annika, I'm not going to go on. I think the article, I think people get the point. Mm-hmm. I certainly got the point by this point in the article, and I just really felt it was really important to share this because as an avid and active environmental advocate, I did not have a full appreciation of this issue, and I'm much more informed now because of this Vox article, and I really just wanted to share it with you and share it with our listeners.
No, I think it was really interesting. And I think, again, can't harp on enough a good example of why supporting your local nonprofits is always great and paying attention to things, because I feel like we're usually the ones that are getting people out there and helping to find it. So I would like to say thanks to everybody who listens in. If you like our show, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening. And again, if you live in the Delaware River watershed, feel free to donate or become a member to the Delaware River Keeper Network. That will all of that will be linked in the show notes.
And so I think we're good. I've already pitched Green Amendments for the Generations, so I don't think our audience needs to hear about that again. I think they got the point. When it comes to Nurdles, organizations like the Delaware River Keeper Network and Green Amendments for the Generations are two different nonprofits coming at this issue from a different angle, but mutually reinforcing, beneficial, powerful, important, and both of them have ways for you to engage. So we hope you will.
Great. So with that, we will see you all next time.